Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. Today we aren't just talking about myths, we are dissecting the very architecture of belief. We're looking at W.G. Aston's Shinto, the way of the gods, but we're reading it through a specific lens. What actually is a god? How does a primitive, unconscious agnostic turn into a devout believer? And why does this ancient Japanese worldview lack a supreme being? It's a crash course in the evolution of the divine, the psychology of atheism versus belief, and the blurred line between a man and a deity.
It is certainly a fascinating journey into the human mind. It's great to be here.
So we are tackling Shinto, and I think for most people, when they hear Shinto, they think of, those beautiful red gates in the water, maybe spirits in the trees, anime references, that sort of thing. It feels very ethereal, very spiritual. But we were looking at a text here by W.G. Aston from the early 20th century. And having read through this, I get this sense this isn't exactly a tourist guidebook.
Oh, far from it. This is a heavyweight scholarly analysis. And we really have to set the stage regarding the source material here. Aston was writing in 1905. He was a diplomat, a scholar of the Japanese language, but he was writing during a time when anthropology was obsessed with categorizing things, with evolution. He approaches Shinto with a very scientific, almost sectical eye. He treats religion not as some mystical revelation, but, as he puts it, a normal function of humanity. He's looking at it biologically, psychologically.
That's what jumped out at me immediately. He's not writing this as a believer. Not at all. He's writing this almost like a doctor diagnosing a condition, though he says it's a normal function, not a disease. But he calls Shinto decidedly rudimentary. That's a bit harsh, isn't it? I mean, this is a religion that has survived thousands of years. Calling it rudimentary feels a bit, well, arrogant.
It sounds harsh to our modern ears, absolutely. And maybe it is a little arrogant. But Aston uses rudimentary in a very specific evolutionary sense. He's a Victorian scholar, remember? He's looking at religion like a biological organism. He means it hasn't developed the complex theological armor that you see in Buddhism or Christianity. It lacks a supreme deity, it lacks a strict moral code, and it lacks a clear distinction between the spirit and the body. For Aston, this is gold. It's like finding a living fossil. It allows him to study how the very concept of God evolves from the ground up. He's not insulting it so much as he is putting it under a microscope.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the first question we have to ask if we're talking about the way of the gods is, what on earth is a god? In Shinto, the word is kami. We usually just translate that as God, but reading Aston, I get the feeling that if I walk into a shrine and say, hello, God, I'm bringing a whole suitcase of Western assumptions that just don't fit.
You are bringing a suitcase, a trunk, and a carry-on of assumptions that do not fit. It's a fundamental error. If you translate kami directly as God, with a capital G, like the omnipotent, omniscient creator found in the Abrahamic traditions, you are missing the point entirely. Aston breaks down the etymology. Kami essentially just means above or superior.
Above. Okay, so we're talking about status. Like a CEO is kami over the intern. Or is it literal, like physically above?
Aston argues it starts quite literally. It applies to the sky because it's physically above us. But Aston points out it also applies to the upper waters of a river. That is kahakami. It applies to the government authorities because they are socially above you. And this is the part that really illustrates the point. It even applies to the hair on your head.
Wait, hold on. My hair is kami.
Linguistically, yes. The word for hair is kami. And why? Because it grows on the top of your head. It is the upper part of you. It's that simple.
That seems almost too simple. It's almost mundane. So if I'm standing at the bottom of a hill, is the rock at the top of the hill kami? In some sense.
In a linguistic sense, it shares the root.
Yes.
But the religious application follows that same logic, just elevated. Anything that is above the ordinary, anything that possesses extraordinary power or inspires dread is kami. It's not about holiness. It's about notability. It's about being exceptional in some way.
So it's not about being good or moral. It's about being intense, powerful.
Intensity is a great word for it. Askin gives a list of things that are considered kami, and it's a wild list. It's not just spiritual beings. It includes thunder, obviously, dragons, but it also includes foxes, tigers, wolves.
Okay, wolves and tigers, I get. They can eat you. They are powerful. That makes sense. But foxes, why are foxes god tier? They seem more tricky than powerful.
Foxes are a fascinating case in Japanese folklore. They are what anthropologists call liminal creatures. They live on the edge of the village. They are smart. They steal food. They seem to vanish into thin air. In an agricultural society, the fox is a creature of immense cunning. It seems to operate by different rules. Aston notes that they are often associated with the rice god, Inari. But initially, the fox itself, the physical animal, was viewed with a mix of dread and awe.
So it's the Wile E. Coyote effect. It's smarter than me, so it must be a god. It outwits the humans.
Essentially. But the list gets weirder, much weirder. Aston notes that kami includes peaches and jewels.
Peaches, like the fruit. I saw that in the notes, and I assumed it was a metaphor for something, like, peaches and cream complexion or something poetic.
No metaphor, literal fruit. This comes from one of the foundational myths of Shinto, one of the most important stories in the Kojiki. Izanagi, the male creator god, travels to the underworld, to Yomi, to try and retrieve his dead wife, Izanami. It goes horribly wrong. She's a rotting corpse covered in maggots. He gets freaked out. He runs away. She feels betrayed and sends the armies of the underworld, the hags of Yomi, to chase him down and kill him.
A classic chase scene, right out of a horror movie.
It is. He's running for his life. He throws his headdress. It turns into grapes. They start to eat them. He throws his comb. It turns into bamboo shoots. They start to eat them. But they keep coming. He reaches the pass that leads back to the land of the living, and there he finds a peach tree. He plucks 3 peaches and throws them at his pursuers.
He throws fruit at the demons from the land of the dead.
He pelts them with peaches, and somehow this works. The demons are driven back by the mystical power of the food. Izanagi escapes, blocks the entrance with a huge boulder, and because the peaches saved him, he turns to the tree and says, and this is a formal declaration, "You are now kami." He gives them a divine title, Oho Kamadumi no Mikoto, their augustness, great divine fruit.
Arise, Sir Peach. That is just unbelievable.
Basically, he says, just as you have saved me, so must you save the people of the central land of reed plains when they fall into distress. He treats the fruit like a sentient savior. He gives it a job.
That is a very low bar for godhood compared to what we're used to. I mean, if I throw a stapler at a burglar and he runs away, I don't build a shrine to the stapler. I don't anoint it. His augustness, great divine office supply.
But that's Aston's entire point about the primitive mind. To the primitive mind, there is no distinction between the natural and the supernatural. Aston actually dislikes the word supernatural because it implies that these people understood the laws of physics and then imagined something breaking them. They didn't. To them, a peach saving your life is just as wondrous and just as natural as the sun rising. It's all just power. The peach had power. Therefore, the peach is above. Therefore, the peach is kami.
So kami is basically anything that makes you go, whoa, anything that stops you in your tracks.
Precisely. Anything that inspires a sense of awe, dread, or reverence. And this brings us to the emotional core of religion, because we have to ask, why do we do this? Why do we look at a storm or a peach and decide it's a person we need to talk to? There's an old Roman idea from the poet Statius that says, fear first made the gods.
That makes intuitive sense. You see a storm, you're scared, you assume it's an angry giant, you try to bribe it, offer it something to stop killing you. It seems like the most basic explanation.
It's the standard atheistic explanation for religion. We are scared monkeys. Religion is just a coping mechanism for a terrifying universe. But Aston disagrees. He pushes back against that very hard. He argues that Shinto and religion generally is based much more on gratitude and love than on fear.
Really? Because dread was the word you used a second ago regarding the wolves and the thunder. That sounds a lot like fear.
Dread is part of it, specifically for the bad kami, the malevolent ones. But Aston looks at the heavy hitters, the biggest gods. Who is at the top of the Shinto pantheon? Amaterasu, the sun goddess.
The sun.
The sun. And what does the sun do? It warms you. It makes the rice grow. It chases away the terrors of the night. Aston argues that life, generally speaking, is worth living. For the ancient Japanese farmer, there were more reasons to be grateful. The sun, the rain, the harvest, than there were reasons to be terrified.
That's a surprisingly optimistic view of pre-modern life. Usually we hear it was nasty, brutish, and short. Plagues, famine, war.
And all that was true. But Aston thinks that's a misconception, or at least an incomplete picture. He says the great gods are beneficent. They are providers. The texts refer to them as august parents. He compares the joy of the sun returning, referencing the famous myth where the sun goddess comes out of the cave, to a rudiment of the beatific vision.
Whoa, pause there. The beatific vision, that's a heavy Catholic theological term. That's usually reserved for Dante seeing God in paradise. It's the ultimate spiritual high, the direct experience of the divine. Aston is applying that to a farmer seeing the sunrise.
He is, and it's a brilliant connection. He's suggesting that the sheer physical joy of sunlight, the biological relief when the cold night ends, is the seed that eventually grows into the high religious concept of divine love.
Yeah.
He's saying you don't need complex theology to feel that the universe is taking care of you. You just need to feel the sun on your face and feel grateful. That gratitude is the birth of the kami.
So the guides aren't just monsters we're trying to appease, they're friends. Or at least patrons, benefactors.
In the case of the sun and the food goddess, yes, they are loved. Aston argues that love and gratitude are stronger architects of religion than fear, because fear makes you want to hide, but gratitude makes you want to connect. You want to say thank you. And to say thank you, you need someone to say it to.
That's a lovely thought. It's a much more positive foundation for belief. But Aston doesn't stop there. He takes us back even further. Before there was gratitude, before there were kami, he talks about a phase of human development he calls the unconscious agnostic.
I love that term. It sounds like a band name. But what does he mean by that?
It is a fascinating concept. We tend to assume that primitive man, and again using Aston's terminology here, naturally sees spirits everywhere. The idea of animism, that every rock and tree has a ghost inside it. We think that's the default setting of the human brain, Aston says. No, that's a later development. That's actually a sophisticated step forward.
So what's the default state? If you reboot the human brain to factory settings, what do we believe? Nothing. The default state is much more like an animal or a very young child. Think about a dog. A dog distinguishes between what is alive and what isn't. A dog knows a rock isn't alive. It doesn't bark at a stone unless it's confused or the stone moves unexpectedly. Aston quotes a Chinese saying that to the primitive mind, the moon is all the same lamp pigeon.
All the same lamp pigeon. I'm going to need a translation for that one. That's a very strange phrase.
It's a bit of broken phrasing, but the meaning is clear. The moon is just a lamp. It's just a thing that gives light. It has no personality. It has no soul. It's just furniture in the sky. It's an object.
So the unconscious agnostic looks at the moon and just sees a shiny object. Not a god, not a spirit, just a rock.
Exactly. He knows nothing of volition or will in the inanimate world. He doesn't have a theology. He doesn't even have a proto-theology. He just accepts the world as it is, materially.
Right. So how do we get from the moon as a rock to the moon as a god? What breaks in our brain? Or what clicks? What's the shift?
It's not a break. It's a projection. Religion begins when man projects his own sense of volition onto the world. He knows that he moves because he wills it. I want to lift my arms lifts. It's a direct experience of cause and effect originating from an inner will. So when he sees the sun move across the sky day after day, he thinks, well, it's moving. It must have a will like mine. It must want to move.
So religion is essentially anthropomorphism. We are painting our own psychology onto the universe because we can't imagine anything moving without a brain behind it.
Aston would say yes.
Yeah.
That is the spark. That is the moment of creation for religion. And from that spark, he identifies two distinct currents in how we build a god. One is personification, and the other is deification.
Okay, distinguish those for us, because they sound similar, like two sides of the same coin.
They meet in the middle, but they start from opposite ends of the spectrum. Personification is taking a force of nature, the sun, the moon, the storm, and giving it a personality. You say the sun is kind or the storm is angry. This is the primary source of Shinto. It's a nature religion.
Right, taking the inhuman and making it human-like. And deification.
Deification is the opposite direction. That's taking a human being, a great hero, a powerful ancestor, a king, and elevating them to the level of a god. Saying this person was so extraordinary in life that they must now have supernatural power in death.
So one is bringing the universe down to our level, and the other is pushing a human up to the universe's level.
Beautifully put. And Aston actually has these theoretical formulas for God that are quite mathematical. He treats it like algebra, which is just so typical of his analytical style. He says God equals infinite power plus absolute humanity.
I like that. God equals power plus personality. It's a simple equation.
Exactly. You start with nature, which is the path of personification. You have the infinite power. The sun is incredibly powerful. But to make it a god, you have to add the humanity. You have to give the sun a name, a gender, a family history. You have to make her a she, Amaterasu.
And if you start with a man, like a Roman emperor, for example.
If you start with a man, the path of deification, you have the absolute humanity. He's definitely a person. But to make him a god, you have to add infinite power. You have to claim this dead king can now control the rain, or cure diseases, or protect the nation from beyond the grave.
And Shinto does both.
It does, but Aston argues Shinto is confused because it mixes them up constantly. You have a nature god, like the sun, who acts like a human woman hiding in a cave because she's sulking about her brother's bad behavior. And you have human gods, like the Mikado, the emperor, who are treated as if they are forces of nature that hold the very fabric of the country together. The line is incredibly blurry.
This brings us to the myths themselves, because if you're personifying the sun, eventually you stop thinking of it as a ball of fire and start thinking of it as, well, a lady. I got it.
That's the slippery slope of metaphor. And Aston is very, very big on the role of metaphor in the creation of myth. He thinks it starts as poetry. It's a linguistic tool.
Yeah.
You want to describe the sun, so you say, she walks across the sky. It makes the idea vivid. It's beautiful language. But then comes what Afton calls the literal-minded vulgar.
The literal-minded vulgar. He really doesn't like the common people, does he? There's a definite strain of elitism there.
He is a bit of a snob, yes. But he's describing a phenomenon we see in all religions, in all belief systems. The masses who cannot distinguish between the poetic metaphor and the physical reality. This, for him, is the pathology of myth. The poet says the sun smiles, and the literalist says the sun has a face.
It reminds me of how people read the Bible or any sacred text. Some see it as allegory, as profound stories about the human condition. Others say, no, the world was made in exactly 6 days, and there was a talking snake.
Precisely. And Aston gives a striking example involving Motori. Now, Motori was one of the greatest Shinto scholars of the 18th century. A brilliant man, highly educated. He knew about Dutch science. He knew the earth was a globe. He was no fool.
So he wasn't an ignorant peasant. He was a leading intellectual.
Not at all a genius. But he was a devout believer. And he insisted that the sun in the sky, the actual physical object that warms your face, was literally the goddess Amaterasu.
Wait, the myths say she was born on Earth, right, from Izanagi's eye.
Yes. The myths say she was born from Izanagi, washing his left eye in a river on Earth. Then she walked around for a while. Then she climbed up a pillar to the sky to take up her duties.
So if the sun is the goddess, was the sun not in the sky before she was born? Was the world just dark? That makes no sense.
That is the logical question. But Motori ignores the contradiction because the metaphor has consumed the reality. He is engaging in massive cognitive dissonance. Aston compares this to a child playing with a doll. The child knows on some level the doll isn't alive. They are engaging in make-believe. But the literalist is like a child who forgets it's a game and actually believes the doll is hungry and gets upset if you don't feed it. The play becomes reality.
That explains the double current Aston talks about. Because when you worship the sun, are you worshiping the burning ball of gas or the lady, the object or the personality?
And it evolves. Aston traces the stages of belief. Stage 1, the sun is the god. Direct worship of the object. Simple, material. Stage 2, the sun is a person. The metaphor takes hold. Stage 3, the sun is a material object ruled by a being like a pilot in a cockpit. The person and object are now separate.
A solar pilot. I like that. So she's driving the sun car across the sky.
Right. And finally, stage 4, spiritism. The idea that the being has a matama, a spirit, that can leave the sun and go live in a shrine on Earth. This is crucial for Shinto because you have these shrines all over Japan where the god is supposed to be. But the sun is clearly still in the sky.
So the matama is the workaround. It's the loophole that allows for physical worship.
It's the interface. It allows the god to be in 2 places at once. But Aston argues Shinto is decidedly rudimentary because it never fully reaches the stage of pure spiritism. The gods are never purely spiritual. They're always dragged back to the material. They have bodies, they leave footprints, they bleed, they eat food, they get tired. They are still very much tied to the physical world.
Speaking of the nature of these gods, we need to address the big question. In the West, when we say God, we usually imply a capital G, a supreme being, a creator, a single boss. Does Shinto have a boss? Is there a Zeus? Is there Yahweh?
Emphatically no. Aston calls Shinto a feeble polytheism.
Feeble, another compliment from Aston. He's not pulling any punches.
He calls it feeble in the sense that the gods are not all powerful, and there is no single hierarchy that makes sense. There is no creator of the universe in the Genesis sense. There are creators of Japan, certainly Izanagi and Izanami, but they didn't make the universe ex nihilo. They stood on a floating bridge and churned the ocean with a spear. The ocean was already there. The bridge was already there.
And even the sun goddess, Amaterasu, she's the most important, right? She's the ancestor of the emperor. She's the star player.
She is the most important, but she is not supreme. She is not omnipotent. She doesn't rule the sea, her brother Susanoo does. She doesn't rule the underworld, Izanami does. And she can be bullied.
Bullied. She's the sun, the most powerful force in the sky.
There's the famous myth where her brother Susanoo, the storm god, goes on a rampage in heaven. He breaks down the dikes of her sacred rice fields, he defecates in her palace, and then he flays a piebald colt and throws it through the roof of her weeding hall, killing one of her attendants. It's grotesque behavior. And what does the ruler of heaven do? Does she zap him with a sunbeam? Does she banish him to the underworld?
I assume she lays down the law. Some divine smiting seems in order.
No. She gets scared, runs away, and hides in a cave. And the whole world goes dark because she's taken the sun with her. The other 80 myriads of gods have to gather and figure out how to coax her out with a party.
That is not exactly the behavior of an almighty god. That sounds like a family drama.
No. It's the behavior of a sister dealing with a problem brother. And when big decisions need to be made, the gods consult each other. They gather in the dry riverbed of heaven and hold a meeting. The universe of Shinto is not a monarchy, it's a council. It's a bureaucracy of spirits.
But surely human nature being what it is, someone must have tried to invent a supreme god. I feel like there's a gravity towards monotheism in history. People want one simple answer, one ultimate power.
Aston notes that there were attempts, he calls them blind and abortive movements. And there is one anecdote he digs up that is just incredible. It's so strange and so specific. It's the story of the insect cult.
The insect cult. This sounds like a folk horror movie. You have to tell us about this.
This is one of the strangest moments in Japanese religious history. It's from the year 644 AD, documented in the Old Chronicles. Picture a rural village in eastern Japan. A man, we don't know much about him, but he's clearly charismatic, starts pointing at a caterpillar.
A caterpillar. Not a dragon, not a tiger. A bug.
Yes. Specifically, a large green caterpillar found on orange trees. Probably a swallowtail butterfly larva. And he tells the villagers, this is the god of the everlasting world.
The god of the everlasting world. That is a massive title for a bug. That's a huge promotion.
A huge title. And he creates a whole theology on the spot. He says that if you worship this caterpillar, if you dance for it and make offerings of sake and vegetables and money, you will have eternal life and immense riches.
And people bought this.
They didn't just buy it, they went insane for it. Aston describes a mass hysteria that swept through the region. The villagers started throwing away their possessions, their treasures, their heirlooms. They were dancing in the streets, shouting, "New riches are coming, new riches are coming." They gathered these caterpillars, built little shrines for them, put them on altars. It spread from the countryside toward the capital like a wildfire.
It sounds like a crypto scam. Or a cargo cult. Worship the bug and get rich quick.
It has all the markers of a desperate populist movement. And you have to ask, why did it take off? Because Shinto, the traditional way, didn't promise eternal life. It didn't promise instant riches. It just promised that the rice would grow if you worked hard and the gods were pleased. This guy comes along and offers a shortcut. A new, powerful, supreme deity who conquers death and poverty.
So what happened? Did the caterpillar god take over? Did Japan become a theocracy run by insects?
The government authorities in the capital looked at this chaos, people not working, throwing away money, dancing in the streets, and said, absolutely not. This was a threat to social order. They sent a famous warrior, Hara no Miyako Kodono, to the village. He didn't debate the theology. He didn't argue about the divinity of caterpillars. He just found the prophet, the leader of the cult, and executed him.
Wow. Game over. Just like that.
Game over. The god of the everlasting world was just a caterpillar again. The cult evaporated instantly. Aston uses this as proof that the people were hungry for a single powerful god, but the establishment wasn't ready for it.
That is a brutal reality check. But it shows that the gap was there. The people wanted a god of the everlasting world. Shinto wasn't giving it to them.
Exactly. Aston argues that Shinto's lack of a supreme being left a vacuum. People crave the absolute. There were other more philosophical attempts, deities like Musubi, the god of growth, or Ame no Manaka Nushi, the central master of heaven, that had the potential to become a supreme being. But they were too abstract. They were too boring for the common people. The people wanted concrete nature gods, or apparently caterpillars that promised them gold.
It's interesting you mentioned the god of the everlasting world promising long life, because that implies a fear of death or a hope for something after. What does Aston say about the Shinto view of the soul? If the gods are physical, is the soul physical too?
This is where Aston gets very materialistic, and honestly, his analysis is quite funny in a dry, academic way. He argues that the Shinto concept of the soul, the mitama or tama, is highly material. In fact, he links the word tama to the word for jewel or ball.
A ball soul, like a marble. You have a little soul marble inside you.
Literally. The soul is often thought of as a round, black object. It's a thing inside the body that can shake loose. You know the phenomenon of the will-o'-the-wisp? The floating lights in marshes.
Sure. Swamp gas, scientifically.
In Japanese, that's hitodama,
Yeah.
man soul. The belief was that the soul could float out of the body, looking like a ball of fire. It's not a spiritual essence that permeates the universe. It's a discrete object. You can almost hold it in your hand.
So if I get really scared, my soul ball might just pop out and float away.
That is the fear. And there were actually rituals called tamafuri soul shaking. If someone was dying or fainting or in a coma, the idea was their soul was loose and about to leave. So you would shake their clothes or shake the person to try and settle the soul back into the body.
It's like shaking a watch to get it working again. That is so mechanical. My soul is loose. Please rattle me. It's almost comical.
It is entirely mechanical. And this leads to Aston's most controversial take on the afterlife. He suggests that primitive man is an agnostic about the afterlife. He doesn't naturally assume immortality. He thinks the distinction between body and soul is a later artificial invention by philosophers.
But wait, Shinto is famous for ancestor worship. You have the household altar, the kamidana. You offer food to Grandpa's spirit. Surely that means they believe Grandpa's still around. That feels like solid proof.
You would think so. That's the logical conclusion. But Aston looks at the funeral rites and argues something very cynical, or perhaps just very practical. He says, offerings to the dead aren't necessarily proof of belief in an afterlife.
How can you offer food to someone you don't think is there? That seems crazy. That's just wasting food.
Aston argues it's for the living.
Yeah.
It's a symbolic language. We bring flowers to a grave today. Do we believe the corpse smells the flowers?
Well, no. We do it to show we remember them. It's for us. It's a gesture of respect.
Exactly. Aston says, funeral observances are rather solace to the living than help to the dead. It's emotional relief. It's a way of processing grief. He even quotes a scientist on this, trying to rationalize it. He says, the physical world is different for the most trifling act of the meanest human being. The doctrine of the conservation of energy is the physical counterpart of the doctrine of the immortality of the soul.
Wow. So he's saying our impact on the world is our only real immortality. That's a very secular, almost atheistic view.
That is Aston's brand. He is looking for the mechanics, not the mysticism. He sees ancestor worship as a mix of fear of the corpse and love for the memory, but not necessarily a firm dogma that Grandpa is in heaven.
So if the soul is just a ball that leaves and there's no supreme judge in the sky, what happens to morality? In Christianity or Islam, God gives you the rules, you follow them, or you sin. Does Shinto have sin?
This is one of the most crucial distinctions Aston makes, and is incredibly hard for Westerners to grasp. Shinto has almost no moral code.
None. No thou shalt nots. No 10 commandments.
In the ancient texts, there are no commandments regarding stealing or lying or adultery. Morality was left to the individual's conscience or the community's laws. It wasn't a religious matter. But Shinto does have a concept called sumi.
And sumi is usually translated as sin, right? That's what I've always seen.
It is, but Aston says that is a deeply misleading translation. Sumi is better translated as pollution or guilt, but purely in a physical or ritual sense, not a moral one.
Give us examples. What is it sumi? What counts as pollution?
Okay, the ancient list of sumi, the things you have to be purified from, include things you would expect, like wounding someone or bestiality. Those are bad. We agree on those. But the list also includes getting dirty, being bitten by a snake, being sick.
Wait, being sick is a sin. If you catch a cold, you've polluted yourself.
In Shinto, yes. Or rather, it is a pollution. If you have a disease or a growth or even just a wound, you are sumi.
That seems incredibly unfair. I have the flu. Sorry, God, my bad.
It's worse than unfair. It's socially brutal. Aston points out that in ancient Japan, if a man fell sick on a journey, his companions would often abandon him. Not because they were cruel, but because he was polluted. He was ritually dangerous to be around.
So it's a quarantine logic. It's about containing the contamination.
Exactly. And the list gets stranger. It includes a wren entering a parturition house.
A bird flying into a delivery room. That's a specific one.
Yes. If a woman is giving birth and a specific type of bird flies in the window, that is sumi. The house is now polluted.
How can you be blamed for a bird? That's just bad luck. It's completely rando.
You aren't blamed in the moral sense. You are polluted. Aston's key insight is that there is no distinction between moral guilt and physical uncleanness. If you murder someone, you are dirty. If you get mud on you, you are dirty. If a bird flies in the window, the space is dirty. And the solution is the same for all of them.
Which is?
A bath.
Her.
Harahi. Purification. You wash away the pollution with water and rituals. It's not about repentance. It's about hygiene. You don't ask for forgiveness. You just get clean.
That completely changes how you view the religion. It's not about being good. It's about being clean.
Exactly. Aston compares it to modern law or social custom. It's about community safety and avoiding ickiness, if you will. It's not about offending a holy God who demands righteousness. The gods just don't like dirt. They don't like blood. They don't like disease. They don't like death.
Speaking of things that might seem odd to modern sensibilities, or Victorian sensibilities specifically, we have to talk about the phallic connection. The outline mentions the Sahe no Kami, and I imagine Aston had a hard time writing about this in 1905.
Oh, the Victorians struggled with this mightily. Aston has to use a lot of Latin terms to keep it polite for his audience, but he addresses it head-on. The Sahe no Kami are the preventive deities. You see these stone pillars at crossroads or village boundaries.
And they are anatomically correct.
In many early cases, they are massive stone phalluses, sometimes painted red. Unmistakable.
Okay. And what is their job? Why put a giant stone phallus at the entrance to your village? What's the thinking there?
To block the road, they are magical barriers. The logic is actually quite fascinating when you unpack it. To the primitive mind, what is the most powerful force in the world? Life. Procreation. The phallus represents the raw, aggressive power of life. It is the ultimate positive force.
That's a weapon, a symbol of power.
It's a shield. The idea is that demons, disease, and death are negative forces trying to invade the community. If you put a massive symbol of life at the edge of the village, it scares away the death. It's a checkpoint. It's like a magical no-entry sign. Stop, life force ahead.
I see. It's like a beware of dogs sign, but biology, very potent biology.
Exactly. But here is where the evolution of belief comes in again, and this is my favorite part of Aston's analysis on this. Later on, Japan changes. It becomes more civilized. It imports Confucianism, which is very strict, very buttoned up, very moral and proper.
And suddenly having giant phalluses everywhere is awkward at the PTA meeting.
It is extremely embarrassing for the theologians. They look at these ancient gods and say, oh, no, we can't have this. This looks primitive. This looks obscene. So they start a rebranding campaign.
They rebranded the giant stone phallus. How do you spin that? What's the marketing angle?
They claimed these gods were actually teachers of virtue. They said, oh, these aren't magical sex charms. These are symbols of marital harmony and the importance of large families and the sacred union of husband and wife.
That is a stretch, a very big stretch.
Aston calls it a pious fraud. He says they moralized the gods. They turned a magical talisman against disease into a moral symbol of wedlock. It shows how a religion desperately tries to adapt its primitive roots to a more sophisticated society. They retcon the history to make it safe for the dinner table.
Retconning the gods. That sounds like a band name, too. And that leads us perfectly into the decay of Shinto. Because eventually, Shinto stank being the only game in town. Buddhism arrives, and Buddhism is heavy.
Buddhism arrives in the 6th century, and it is a juggernaut. It has everything Shinto lacks. It has a deep philosophy of suffering and enlightenment. It has a clear moral code, the Eightfold Path. It has beautiful, sophisticated art statues, temples, paintings. And most importantly, it has a clear answer to what happens when I die.
Right. Shinto just has your soul ball falls out and maybe we shake your clothes. Buddhism has reincarnation, nirvana, hell realms, pure land heavens. It's a much more detailed product.
Exactly. It was a Ferrari compared to Shinto's ox cart. And so Buddhism steamrolled Shinto, but it didn't destroy it. It absorbed it. This is the era of Ryobu Shinto, Dual Shinto.
How does that work? How do you merge two completely different systems?
Think of it like a corporate merger, where the smaller company keeps its name on the door, but the CEO is from the big acquiring company. The Buddhist priest basically said, look, your Shinto kami are real. We aren't denying them, but they're just local avatars of the eternal Buddhas and Bodhisattvas.
So Amaterasu, the sun goddess?
She's actually just a local manifestation of the Buddha Vairocana, the cosmic sun Buddha. She's the Japanese branch office of a universal deity.
That is a clever takeover strategy. We're not replacing your god, we're just upgrading her title. It's incredibly savvy.
It was brilliant, and it worked for 1,000 years. Shinto became a sideshow to Buddhism. The shrines were run by Buddhist monks. But then, in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, you get the rationalist revival. Scholars like Moturi and Hirata, the guys we mentioned earlier, they wanted to purge the foreign influence. They wanted pure Shinto.
Make Shinto great again, the nationalist impulse.
Essentially, they wanted to strip away the Buddhism and Chinese philosophy and get back to the real Japanese way. But there was a supreme irony in their work. Aston points out that in their attempt to go back to the pure past, they were actually using Chinese rationalism to do it.
How so? How were they using the thing they were trying to get rid of?
They tried to turn Shinto into a systematic monotheism. They exalted the creator gods, who are barely mentioned in the old myths, to try and compete with Western ideas and Christian theology, which were starting to arrive in Japan. They wanted a supreme being because the West had one, and it looked powerful.
So they were inventing a new religion and pretending it was the old one?
Precisely. They adopted a rigid form of ancestor worship, which Aston says wasn't really central to the original myths, and tried to construct a systematic theology that the old texts just didn't support. They wanted Shinto to be a civilized religion, but its roots were too rudimentary. They were trying to build a skyscraper on a foundation made of mud huts.
And what is Aston's final verdict? Where does he see Shinto going, writing in 1905?
Well, he's fairly pessimistic about Shinto as a religion. He concludes it is almost extinct as a genuine faith. He sees it surviving as folklore or as patriotism, a set of rituals tied to loyalty to the emperor, but not as a living, breathing spiritual path. He argues that without a deep moral core, without a concept of the infinite, a religion can't survive in the modern world. It remains a rudimentary cult of gratitude and cleaning.
A cult of gratitude and cleaning. That is a brutal summary. But when you look at the origins he's laid out, the fear of the storm turning into love of the sun, the awe of the peach, the desperate hope for a caterpillar god, you can see the human struggle in it. It's not just primitive. It's us trying to figure things out from scratch.
Absolutely. Aston may be critical, he may be a bit of a Victorian snob, but he paints a vivid picture of humanity trying to make sense of a confusing universe. We start by saying the sun is alive. Then we say the sun is a person. Then the sun is a god. And finally, maybe we look in the mirror and realize we were just projecting our own face onto the sky all along.
That is the ultimate takeaway, isn't it? We've seen gods born from gratitude, myths born from metaphors taken too literally, and a religion that is actually a mix of government ritual, hygiene, and nature appreciation.
It strips away the mystique, but it leaves something very human and maybe even more profound underneath.
Aston suggests that the concept of God is something we construct, first by personifying the sun, then by deifying men. If we strip away the fear, the rituals, and the literal-minded myths, are we left with a hidden spiritual truth? Or are we, as Aston suggests of primitive man, all just unconscious agnostics projecting our own will onto a silent universe? Something to think about next time you see the sun rise.
Indeed. A lot to think about there.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Deeper by 6-7.